Only met Paul a few months ago, actually, but what struck me immediately is his deep desire and need at the same time to encounter people where their heart lies, in their deepest needs. So for this reason, he became both a friend and a teacher of mine immediately, someone who I'm glad and honored to follow, someone who has words that explain reality better than mine. You can find his full bio on the program that you have received here. And I just want to add that Paul was a distinguished university professor, still is, because he never stopped being a professor, at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where he taught from 1968 to 2000. And currently he's a emeritus professor at Boston College, or from Boston College. He has published numerous books of prose, and he's the author of 7 poetry collections and several poet biographies. So let's welcome Paul Mariani.
Good evening. Thank you very much. You could be in a bar somewhere having a nice drink instead of here, so I appreciate you taking your time to come. I met Paolo, I met Mattia, met others this summer up in the northern Catskills. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, somebody. Yeah. Okay, right here. Yeah. Can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay, great. When they asked me to speak tonight, the first thing was they said, just repeat what you did up in the Catskills, and I said, no, I'll be in New York. I want to do. Let me have that water, okay, with the gin in it. Good stuff, Tito's. Yeah. Okay. So. Okay. Listen. Maybe I should sit down with this thing. What do you think?
That's right, like shorter version.
Okay, listen. Hold on one second, folks. I don't want to get pierced by this thing. Okay. So I thought, okay, why don't I grew up in New York City back in the 1940s, okay? Left it, moved out to Long Island, Levittown, and then Mineola, then moved Flushing, got married. My wife is from Richmond Hill. Went to school down here. I taught police officers down here years ago. Frank Serpico was one of my students, which was terrific. I taught at Lehman, I taught at Hunter, got my PhD from the Graduate Center at the City University of New York back in '68. Then with 3 little boys, my wife and I moved up to Massachusetts, and I taught there from '68 to 2000. I have 3 sons. The oldest one's a Jesuit priest. So I said, why not work with the Jebbies? Okay, so I moved to Boston College, and I worked there for the last 16 years, and then just retired a year ago, June. Anyway, I'm also a biographer, so I thought one of the things that I've tried to do in my biographies is you go through the life, you say, what's really motivating these poets? You know, what's really motivating a human being? And in each case, I found something that went deep, something spiritual. Okay, not that all of the critics wanted to hear about this. Okay, believe me, they didn't want to hear about this, but it's there. It's you know, and I'll back it up. With the poetry, and I'll back it up with the letters and life, etc. So that's been, I suppose, because it's important to me that I was looking for it in the various poets. So I started out with Dr. William Carlos Williams, right across the Hudson River here, over in Rutherford, New Jersey, Clifton, Passaic, Patterson. Okay, I remember when I was doing my PhD work, I went to a bookstore and I saw a book called Patterson, and that's where my relatives, on my mom's side, used to work in the silk mills along the on the Passaic River. I said, who the hell would write a poem about a place like Paterson, New Jersey? But there it was, a great poem, a very democratic poem. Williams was very much influenced by Walt Whitman in that tradition, okay? So I worked on Williams, and then I said, okay, who's next? And from there I said, okay, let's try this Robert Lowell. Worked with him for a while, and then I had a dream one night where John Berryman walks into the room, and Berryman pushes Lowell aside. Pushes him out of there. He says, "You're doing me now, okay?" I said, "Okay, I got it." So I stopped doing Lowell and wrote a biography of John Berryman. Then I went back to Lowell. Who's next? I said, okay, it'll be Hart Crane. I've always wanted to do Hart Crane. It's a wild life right here in New York City. This boy from Ohio. The Brooklyn Bridge is right down the street here. That's his icon. That's his mystical icon right there, the Brooklyn Bridge, okay? So then I did that. Then I moved. I said, the one that I had started out with back in Hunter, back in the late 60s, was Gerard Manley Hopkins, the Jesuit priest. And I said, I want to do him again. And my first book was a critical study, and now I'm coming back and I do the Hopkins biography. And then after all these years of teaching, like over 4 decades, 4.5 decades, I say, okay, I think it's time to do Wallace Stevens, okay? Which is not an easy thing to do. I mean, a lot of people have said, a lot of critics have said, the most boring person you could write a life of is Wallace Stevens, okay? You could do the whole life in 400 words, okay, and have some left over. Probably true, to a degree, okay? Unless you go into the interior, unless you go into the mind, into the imagination of this poet, and then you could fill volumes. And I fell in love with Stevens's work. I still am. I'm haunted by his work. So, but it was the most difficult book to do. I mean, look, James Franco comes along and he says, I want to do the life of Hart Crane. Why not? Okay, it's an exciting life. He's a roaring boy. New York, he's picking up sailors right across the river here, moves down, he writes The Bridge. He's going to write a great epic about Mexico, goes down on a Guggenheim, meets Peggy Cowley, who's there on a divorce from Malcolm Cowley, her husband. He has his first and only heterosexual affair, gets back on the ship, and is heading, they're going to get married when they get back to New York, okay? They're on their way, and Hart Crane tries to pick up a sailor. He gets beaten up. Comes the next morning, he says to Peggy, he says, I've been disgraced. Walks to the back of the SS Orizaba, waves goodbye, and then jumps off the ship. They never recovered his body. He was 32 years old. So that's a kind of exciting kind of a life. You know what I mean? It's the kind of thing that James Franco could pick up and go with, okay? So I said, well, how about Wallace Stevens? You want to do Wallace? Not on your life, he says. Not on your life. He said, I might do John Berryman. I might do John Berryman, who also jumped off, bridge. But I would never do Wallace. And it's true, you'd have to really be a whole different kind of director, I think, to do someone like, it could be done, but a lot of it would be interior, with the poetry, the music, etc. So, enough. So I picked these poems. I said, I'm going to New York. Let's look at the working class. I'm from a working class background myself. So I thought I'd start with my favorite poet, who was Gerard Manley Hopkins, and I would look at this poem. The first one there is called Felix, Randall, and talk about it. It goes, now here's Hopkins, a young Jesuit. He's working in Liverpool in the slum district, okay, in 1879, 1880, 81. And one of his parishioners is a young man in his early 30s named Felix Spencer, okay? And not Randall, but Felix Spencer. What he does is, this guy, is big, burly, if you're going to shoe horses, you better know how to hold a horse's foot. You're going to get your head caved in, So he's a big guy, he's rough, and then he comes down with cancer, okay? And there's Father Hopkins in charge of him, in the sense of being a spiritual director. And so he wrote this poem, which I find it very touching. Let me just give you a little hint. He calls it Felix Randall. The man's name was Felix Spencer, okay? So Felix means blessed or happy, right? Randall is a word that you don't usually pick up very often. You have to go to the OED to find it, okay? And a randle is like a strip of leather that's placed between the horse's horseshoe and the hoof itself. It cushions it, okay? It's a buffer. And it works perfectly in this poem with what Hopkins is trying to say, all right? So let me read it and we'll talk a little bit about it. A Faria, by the way, is a blacksmith, right? You don't see too many of them around here in New York City anymore, but they used to be around, okay? Felix Randall the Faria. Oh, is he dead then? My duty all ended, who have watched his mold of man, big-boned and hearty handsome, pining till time when reason rambled in it and some fatal four disorders, flesh there, all contented. Sickness broke him. Impatient, he cursed at first, but mended, being anointed and all. Though a heavenlier heart began some months earlier, since I had our sweet reprieve and ransom tendered to him. Ah well, God rest him all road ever he offended. This seeing the sick endears them to us too it endears. My tongue had taught thee comfort, touch had quenched thy tears that touched my heart, child, Felix, poor Felix Randall. How far from then forethought of all thy more boisterous years, when thou at the random grim forge, powerful amidst peers, didst fettle for the great grey dray horse, his bright and battering sandal. A couple of questions here. I didn't know that horses wore sandals, okay? They don't. But that's the whole point. There's a transformation that occurs here. When you think of a great big dray horse, you know, like you used to see it, I remember as a kid in New York City, pulling the old wagons, you know what I mean, with all kinds of junk on their back, the milkmen and all. Big, strong dray horses. And what's happened here is that Felix Randall there's a transformation that's going on where he moves from being a dray horse himself to a figure like Pegasus, the horse, the flying horse, okay? Light with the sandals, okay? Now, what caused that transformation in Felix Randall? Well, that's what the poem's about. It's the viaticum. It's the Holy Communion that he received. It's the sacraments that he received that changed him. Okay, this is what he's talking about. And when he says, for example, how far from then forethought all, literally forethought is a kind of prefiguration. So what he's looking at is, this is Felix Randall as you saw him, folks, a rough, tumbled kind of guy in the streets, tough as an Irishman, he was Irish, okay? That Felix Randall, and then this transformation that occurs in him, which has also, by the way, transformed me, Hopkins says, the priest. I've been changed by this. These tears touched me as well. And in the poem, I think you are also perhaps touched by the loss of this Felix Randall. It's if you're interested, it's a Petrarchan sonnet, right? ABBA, ABBA, CD, CD, I'm sorry, CCD, CCD. So you've got ended, and you've got contended, and then you've got this wonderful handsome, and some, began some, ransom, okay? Wonderful the way you can do this. And then endears, tears, years, peers, and then just those two rhymes, Randall is transformed into sandal at the end, okay? I could go on, there's so much here. You look at these phrases here, tongue, touch, tears, touched. So much, but let's move on. What you've got here is a Jesuit composition of place, by the way, okay? This is the way Hopkins shapes his poems. He gives you the story. This is the story of Felix Randall, and then from that he draws a moral, or he draws a meaning out of that story, that parable, okay? This is what and he does this over and over. Now, I want to move from that to Claude McKay up here in Harlem in 1921 in a poem that he wrote in his early 30s called Subway Wind. The subway up in Harlem had opened just a few years before this poem was written, okay? Now, I don't know if you've ever been to a subway museum. I mean, these subways have changed a good deal, but these are the ones with the old straps that hung down, okay? And they had the old fans, you know, that would whir around. But it was pretty hot well, going to so I don't know about today, but they could be pretty hot right now, I guess, you know, the subways, okay? And so what you get here is the image of Harlem, 1921, with the kids trying to find some air that they can breathe. And then the dream, as he moves out, he says, if I could only be back in Jamaica now. If I could only be on the beaches with his real wind, real fresh wind, okay? So it's a sense of captivity, of being locked or imprisoned in something, and this desire for freedom that you find in the poem by Claude McKay, okay? Far down, down to the city's great gaunt gut. Can you feel that? It's almost like Dante, huh? Let me do that again. Far down, down to the city's great gaunt gut. The gray train rushing bears the weary wind. In the packed cars, the fans, the crowd's breath cut, leaving the sick and heavy air behind. And pale-cheeked children seek the upper door to give their summer jackets to the breeze. Their laugh is swallowed in the deafening roar of captive wind that moans for fields and seas. Seas, cooling warm where native schooners drift through sleepy waters, while gulls wheel and sweep, waiting for windy waves, the keels to lift lightly among the islands of the deep. Islands of lofty palm trees blooming white that lend their perfume to the tropic sea, where fields lie idle in the dew-drenched night, and the trades float above them, fresh and free. I'm learning more and more about Claude McKay. I'm really fascinated by the man. They just discovered one of his novels that was never published, called Amiable with Big Teeth, okay? And it's about the way Claude McKay sees the Communist Party at the period of the Abyssinian Mussolini's invasion of Abyssinia, Ethiopia, in 1936, okay? And the way that Claude McKay says, and that, I don't think these leaders are really speaking for our people. This is what he's getting at in the poem. And a few years later, he would die in 1947. He said, well, I've been looking all my life for an answer. I've been an agnostic, I've been an atheist, I've been a member of the Communist Party. And he says, the only thing that seems to work for me is the Catholic Church. And so late in his life, he became a Catholic, okay? He said, I'm not going to apologize for this. This is serious stuff, he said, you know, to various friends of his, you know, who had difficulty accepting that he would do this. The same is going to be true of Wallace Stevens when I get to him, because he also did the same thing. Okay, now here we go, Hart Crane, my boy. Hart Crane, The Bridge. This is from the tunnel section of The Bridge, this epic that he wrote all the way through the mid-20s and finally published in 1930. I wanted to do this section because it's right here, it's right down the road here. It's the subway that goes under the river, under the East River, right by the Brooklyn Bridge. So what you're getting is a journey under the river, and then coming up on the other side, on the Brooklyn side, turning around and looking at Manhattan, New York, back in 1926. Okay, it was a little different then. Okay. So, and by the way, this is also in terms of the bridge. This is the moment, the tunnel. This is the de profundis. This is the the descent into hell. This is what this is. Death. Hell. Because he had begun with the bridge, walking across the bridge. And for him, and being very much in love with a sailor, Emil Ofer, which had only lasted less than a year, but for him it meant everything for Hart Crane, and he lost that, and now he wonders, he's a gay man. As I say, he had only one heterosexual relationship at the end, but he feels it's not easy for him. There's a kind of guilt that he feels towards this. And you'll find, I think, something of the tension that he himself is feeling in the poem. Okay, so let's take a look at some of it here, okay? And so he says, and so of cities you bespeak subways, rivered under streets and rivers. In the car, that is the subway car, the overtone of motion underground. The monotone of motion is the sound of other faces, also underground. So what you're going to hear here is a series of voices, okay? That's what you're hearing, okay? This is one of them. Let's have a pencil, Jimmy. Living now at Floral Park, Flatbush, on the 4th of July, like a pigeon's muddy dream. Potatoes to dig in the field. Traveling to town, too, night after night. The Culver Line, that's the one that goes from Brooklyn out to Coney Island, okay? The Culver Line, the girls all shaping up. It used to be. Then he thinks, our tongues recant like beaten weather vanes. This answer lives like verdigris, like hair beyond extinction, surcease of the bone, and repetition freezes. That is, what can I hold on to? What is at the core? What is permanent, if there is permanency? What do you want? Get in a week on the links? Van Daddle Daddy, don't ask for change. Is this 14th? It's 6:30, she said. If you don't like my gait, why did you swing on it? Why did you swing on it anyhow? And somehow, anyhow, swing. Now, clearly, that's a sexual, a guy's bought prostitute, and she says, you want change? You're not getting any change. Not from this baby, no. But I think it also has to do with his own relationships with a number of them that lasted one night. Do you know what I mean? That sense, too. Then it goes on. Remember the old phonographs for the 78s, okay? The phonographs of Hades in the brain are tunnels that rewind themselves, and love, a burnt match skating in a urinal. What a powerful image, love. This is what love is. You take a burnt match and throw it into the urinal there, and then it swirls around like a vortex into a whirlpool and disappears. Somewhere above 14th, take the express to brush some new presentiment of pain. And only today, I've been studying this guy for years and years, but you always learn something, So I'm taking the train down from New Haven, and I say 14th. Why is he pushing 14th, 14th, 14th? Then, it's the 14th station of the Via Crucis. Christ is laid in the tomb. This is the death of love. That's what this is. There's two kinds of love. There's eros, pornos, okay? And then there's Christ's love. Gave everything, okay? But I want service in this office. Service, I said. After the show, she cried a little afterwards, but whose head is swinging from the swollen strap? Now, this is one of those, in the subway, the strap is up there, and he looks up, it's nighttime, he looks up and he sees a head as though it were being hung, someone had been just hung. Okay, who is it? Whose body smokes along the bitten rails, bursts from a smoldering bundle far behind in back forks of the chasms of the brain, puffs like a ribbon stump far out behind in interburrow fissures of the mind. That's himself. That's what he's afraid of, death, his own death. Is this the way I'm going to wind up? That's one. And then he goes on, he says, and why do I often meet your visage here? Now, he's living over here right across the river, from the Brooklyn Bridge. And he's taken this train many, many times. It's midnight, he's looking out, and he sees a face in the straps. And he says, Your eyes like agate lanterns. Now remember the old days where the orange lantern is saying slow down as the train goes down and then up? That's what he's talking about. But now it's the eyes of this figure. You know what it is? It tells you, right? Edgar Allan Poe. This is Poe. The poet, young poet like Crane, how did he die? Well, the story was that what happened was he was in Baltimore, he was drunk, and it was election night. So they needed extra votes. Sound familiar? And so they took him from poll station to poll station, drunk, so that he could vote maybe 10 or 15 times. And then they left him there, and he died. That's the story, okay, of how Poe died, all right? So, on and on below the toothpaste and the dandruff ads up there on the subway, huh? And did their writing eyes right through your side? And did their eyes like unwashed platters ride? And death, aloft, gigantically down, probing through you, toward me, oh, evermore. You can hear the echoes of Poe's own work here, you know, nevermore, evermore, etc. And when they dragged your retching flesh, your trembling hands that night through Baltimore, that last night on the ballot rounds, did you, shaking, did you deny the ticket, Poe? What happened at the end? Were you true, or did you betray something? Which is what he's afraid of as well. Can I say yes at the very end, or will it be a no at the end, the non seriam? And then suddenly, two places for Gravesend Manor changed at Chambers Street. Now, you've probably gone on these railroads, but you never thought, wait a minute, Gravesend. I never thought death, and then also Chamber, okay? Chambers Street. The platform hurries along to a dead stop. The intent escalator. Now, he's watching, he's not getting off the train, but he's watching people getting up. Like, this is right out of The Wasteland, which he admired a great deal, you know. T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, and you've got the intent escalator lifts the serenade stilly of shoes, umbrellas, each eye attending its shoe, then bolting outright somewhere above where streets burst suddenly in rain. The gongs recur. This is in the old days. That's how they let you know that the next train was coming, with a gong. Okay. Elbows and levers, guard and hissing doors. Shh. Thunder is galvothermic here below. You hear thunder, but it's a thunder from the underworld. He's in hell. The car wheels off. The train rounds, bending to a scream, taking the final level for the dive under the river. Now he's at the very bottom of the East River before it starts to ascend again. And somewhat emptier than before, demented. He hears the cry, you know, the screech of the wheels, and it sounds like a crazy monster of some sort, laughing. For a hitching second humps, there it is, that sexual image again. And then let's go. Toward corners of the floor, newspapers wing, revolve and wing, blank windows gargle signals to the roar. And does the demon take you home? The devil. Evil. Does it take you home as who? The wop washerwoman. What he's talking about here is an Italian immigrant working in the city, in the lower New York City. She's got a family back home. She's getting home maybe 1 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so after working. But it goes back. If you've read the whole poem, it goes back to Columbus from Genoa. Okay, Columbus leaving from Genoa, because look what he's going to say here. He says, wop washerwoman with a bandaged hair. After the corridors are swept, the cuspidors, remember cuspidors where you spit into, and the woman had to clean those, okay? The gaunt sky barracks, cleanly now, and bare, O Genoese. Do you bring mother eyes and hands back home to children and to golden hair? By the way, I just want to throw something out. He's talked about the 14th station. I think that this is a reference to the mother who was there with her son at the death, to Mary as well, I think. I would just suggest that, okay? Because Mary is everywhere in the poem, by the way. He has this deep devotion to Mary. Let me tell you a quick story. Even when he was down in Mexico City, just before he, a couple of months before he died, he sends a postcard to Peggy Cowley, his woman he's having the relationship with. And what postcard does he pick out? It's Our Lady of Guadalupe. He says, now here's a real lady, he says. But that's interesting, he should have chosen that. All right. So what you get here is, you get this sense of